Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Death Note, Part 1, Episode 4, Pursuit. For our episode in a nutshell, we give a 1 to 2 line summary of exactly what happens within the episode. Light experiments with the Death Note to make a plan to get the FBI agent's name, then goes on a date where a written sequence of events ensues, giving him the agent's name. We'll now go through the episode scene by scene, giving our opinions on each scene as we go. We open up on this episode back in the Shinigami realm, the barren and desolate gray landscape where groups of Shinigami are sitting around and gossiping about Ryuk. They talk about how Ryuk has 2 notebooks, and that he dropped one of them in the human world. And they simply aren't able to understand why he would ever want to haunt a human. They consider it to be tedious and boring. And then they decide that they have no idea why Ryuk does what Ryuk does. And the scene explains itself, not really much more to say than that. In this episode, we pick up where the last episode left off, with Ryuk offering the ideal to Light. Light refuses the deal, his reason being he's creating a new world, and he wants to be around to rule it. So giving up half of his life is simply out of the question. Ryuk says he knew he would say that, he just didn't want Light to say he didn't tell him earlier. To which Light replies that he's already too late, because if he had mentioned it when they first met, or if he had written it in the instructions in the Death Note, he might actually have considered giving up half his lifespan for the eyes. Rick thinks about it and agrees that he's probably right, but he didn't think of it, and internally muses over Light's lack of fear and his willingness to give him a hard time, which is unusual for humans that he's known in the past. Light then shuts off his light, leading to his stalker outside leaving. Then he asks Ryuk if there's anything else he wants to tell him ahead of time. Ryuk says that's everything, well, thinking more or less. Light says it's disappointing, making a joke about how he would have considered the deal for wings, which are more godlike. But Ryuk, missing the joke entirely, says he'd just stand out and get arrested. Light goes on to laugh about how if he kept making deals for eyes and wings, he'd become a real Shinigami. And Ryuk kind of looks at him and then says, without that, he's already a fine Shinigami, telling him the Shinigami realm is rotten, and Shinigami live empty lives, only taking human lives so they don't die, and they have completely forgotten why they exist, if there even was a reason to begin with. Light then says it sounds like he's doing more work, but he shouldn't be lumped in with Shinigami, as he's a human using the Death Note for other humans. He then claims the Shinigami realm to be meaningful, as the world would change greatly due to the occasional existence of Death Notes, before suggesting, when Ryuk returns to his realm, that he should use what he has learnt from Light to change it as well. Ryuk says Light is a positive thinker, which he agrees. After all, a negative thinker wouldn't try to change the world. As he's been speaking, he's been fiddling with the note, and after glancing again at the rules, figures out a way to identify and deal with his stalker by using the rules to his advantage. He then decides to start doing tests in order to figure out what the limitations of the rules are. This scene is basically an exposition dump. It's giving us information, it's telling us information about how Shinigami live, it's giving us more insight into past humans who may have used the note, and also insight into Light's plan going forward. But it's all very self-explanatory, not much else to say. At the task force headquarters, Suichiro answers a call reporting that 6 more inmate deaths have occurred, but he's shocked to learn that 3 of the inmates exhibited bizarre behavior before dying of heart attacks. One of them drew a weird symbol in blood. One left a letter behind, and the last escaped, but only made it as far as the bathroom before dying. Watario video chats with L, with informing him of the update, and sends him the information, leading to L musing on whether Kira can control actions as well as time of death. L then tells Srichiro to keep the strange actions from the media, having them only report the heart attacks, as it's possible Kira is running tests, which offends Srichiro as he considers using people's lives like a game to be a very bad thing. L then muses that if Kira is running tests, he would be trying to achieve something, and he wonders what he may be trying to retrieve or achieve. Again, there's not much to say about it. It's pretty self-explanatory on this particular scene, though I do like that this time Elle is musing to himself instead of into the microphone and the public, because I did find that a little bit cringy when he did it the first time in episode 2, when he was just train of thought into the microphone so that the entire public and Light could hear his thoughts and his musings and everything. Much better that they are now inside his head where they belong. At home, Light checks his results for his tests through hacking his dad's computer, saying after looking at the files that they were all within his expectations, and he'll be able to do what he wanted to do. Ryuk asks him what he means, and Light explains that the tests he had done, one of them escaped to the bathroom as he wrote, one drew the symbol that he wrote, and one wrote the letter that he wrote, which read, "Lord have mercy, I'll be hanged or killed by Kira. He's going to get me." However, the other three he had given more difficult tasks to, and these tasks were ones that they were unable to fulfill, leading to them simply dying of heart attacks. The first was to die at the Eiffel Tower, but as it was physically impossible to get to the Eiffel Tower within the time frame noted, he just died. The next one was to draw Elle's face, but as he had no knowledge of what Elle looked like, he couldn't draw him, and again died of the heart attack. And the third was to write a note saying that he knows Elle is suspicious of the Japanese police, but he couldn't because people can't write things that they don't know or wouldn't have come up with on their own. In short, he concludes that the note can't do the impossible, but as long as it's within what might have been reasonably expected of the person to do on their own, their actions can be controlled as much as he wants. Rick then asks him what he's trying to do, but instead of answering, Light decides to stay mysterious and says that Ella's probably trying to decipher the dying messages, changing the subject, and notes that the dying messages meant nothing. But rather than what Light was thinking, Ella is in fact musing that Kira is definitely about to start something, which he hopes will mean that the FBI might notice someone acting suspiciously. But then he does start thinking whether or not there's any messages that have meaning. He knows that there is a goal to these tests and wonders if that goal might be read through the messages and the actions taken before death. He then sees and notices that the top of the letter writes out, "L, did you know?" We then return back to Light, and Light decides to start the main act, picking his criminal from the web, the online, the internet, and calling a girl he knows for a date, telling Rook that he's actually quite popular. I feel a bit bad for Ryuk. He oftentimes is used kind of like a sounding board so that Light can speak his thoughts out loud so that we, the audience, can hear what he's planning. But at the same time, we also hear his thoughts. So I feel like it's a disservice to Ryuk to reduce him to that, a sounding board, nothing more. I also find it somewhat funny that Light laughs at Elle thinking there may be meaning to the messages. Well, he actually did leave a hidden meaning. He put the top letters of the note that he left to spell out L, did you know? Question mark. That is a hidden message. It may not have much meaning, but It's not odd that Elle would look for it, given that he did leave it there. Light arrives at the bus stop for the date that he set up with his classmate Yuri, glad to see that the FBI agent is still following him, or else everything that he set up would have been meaningless. Ryuk asks what his plan is, and Light, before he reaches his date, asks if he saw what he wrote, but Ryuk says it would be boring to peek. So Light then counters that he just has to be patient and watch what happens. Light greets his date, and the agent takes note that he seems like a normal, serious student, writing that there are no grounds for suspicion, and then thinks about it being his last day following Light. He then follows Light and his date onto the bus to Spaceland, and it is just so sad. He wrote there was no grounds for suspicion. Light would have been free and clear, but he just has to do this because not getting caught is like impossible for Light. He's hardwired to want to be caught at this point. And it's so sad because it's his last day following him. If Elle had waited even like a couple more days, he would have been gone. No grounds for suspicion. Light would have been able to go on. But instead, in order to set up the cat and mouse, we know what the show is about. I understand it. But still, why are they making... It's so sad. He's just about to finish his job. Light is just about to get away from it. Away with it. It's so sad. As Light intended, his chosen criminal boards the bus, and then immediately takes it hostage while telling the driver to call Spaceland and demand their profits from the previous day. He then wants those profits to be brought to a bus stop nearby before the bus gets there, and to not tell the police or he'll kill all the passengers before he breaks the phone to prevent any further communication. Light holds a note for Yuri, his date, to see, which says he'll look for a chance to disarm the criminal. The agent behind him tells him not to do that because it's too dangerous, and if it comes to that, he'll be the one to do it. Light goes to write another note, but the agent stops him, saying that whispering won't be heard over the sounds of the bus. Light then asks how they know that the agent isn't an accomplice, saying it's common that the criminal will pretend to be alone while secretly having someone watch his back. Feeling confident at this point that Light isn't Kira, he gives over his FBI ID with his real name, which is Ray Pember. This allows Light to realize that Elle has the FBI looking into those connected to the police, before smiling and saying this proves he can trust him. But he won't ask why an FBI agent is on the bus. Ray then looks forward and recognizes the criminal from the news and remembers his crimes, which was an armed robbery that led to the death of civilians, I believe the store clerk and customers, and begins to think that he's very dangerous. Light then lets a paper fall from his pocket, which gets noticed by the criminal when he reaches for it. The criminal picks up the paper while Ray worries because of the previous note that he read over Light's shoulder, but it just has Light's date plans on it. As the criminal walks back to the front of the bus, he then notices Ryuk hovering at the back and starts yelling at him. Ryuk, not really in on the plan at this point, asks if he can see him, and the criminal yells even more and yells that he's going to shoot. Ray, having seen the previous news reports that this criminal is into the drugs, thinks that he's hallucinating, yelling for everyone to get down. Ryuk realizes the date plans were on a paper cut from the note, so now only the criminal can see him. The criminal then starts shooting, but Ryuk previously indicated that bullets couldn't kill him, so He's completely fine. They just go right through him. Rook commends Light's cleverness in using what he said before and the rules of the note to set up the hijacking to get the name of the agent. Ray then makes his move, and the criminal makes the bus driver pull over, running outside, being chased by Ray, and gets hit by a car. While everyone else looks in shock, Light checks his watch, noting the death was right on schedule. He then notes that the death note never deviates, and then thinks, "You're next, Ray Pember." And again, it's sad. Ray was this close, but also finally, and I mean this so seriously, finally we get back to Light's cleverness. He's supposed to be a genius. This was very clever setup. Took a lot of thought, took creativity, took knowing what was happening, had to account for various variables. And so finally we are back to Light being smart. And it has been a long time coming at this point. I mean, we're only on episode 4, but episode 1, established as a genius. Episodes 2 and 3, completely backtracking on that. Finally, he is back to being smart, and we are so happy to see it. But again, it's very sad for Ray. Like, this is a character that I feel so bad for because it's just that close. And now we have come to the end of this episode, and it's time for our rankings. There are 2 ranking lists, our mostly objective ranking list and our personal ranking lists. The mostly objective, it's mostly objective because it uses a chart which can't be influenced by emotion. However, it is influenced by bias and judgment, as I made the chart and I decide what goes on it and what applies. My personal rankings, that's purely what I feel and what I think about the episode as I rewatch it. All right, so now on screen we have our mostly objective rank values, and I've highlighted those that apply. This time we're going to start with the negative, -1 for excessive exposition again. Again, if you've shown us, you don't need to explain it then after the fact, and you don't have to explain things multiple times. We watched the entire hijacking scene, and then Light goes and explains what he did. I left that out of the summary because honestly, I just told you what happened. I don't need to repeat what happened yet again. But they show us and then they explain it to us. And honestly, I think given the age of what this audience would be, I don't think they need to do that. So almost every episode now we have had excessive exposition as a -1, and good thing it's only worth a -1, but it applies here yet again. And on to the positives. So I consider there to be world building. We've learned how the rules may apply, and we've seen the testing of the rules, and then we've seen the rules put into action and the extent to which that they can control what happens. So I consider that to apply, and that is 4 points. For a scene to be memorable, in my opinion, you have to be able to be years out of rewatching the show. And when you think about it, just sitting around and you think about a moment in the show, it's one that pops into your head. For Death Note, years out of watching it the first time before rewatching it, when I think about things that I recall happening in the series, standout moments, standout events, this hijacking scene is one that does stand out pretty clearly. So to me, it applies as being a memorable scene, and that is worth 3 points. And then we also have the introduction of Ray as a single arc supporting character. He didn't count the last episode because he had no name. He was just a trench-coated figure. He counts this episode because we've learned his name and we've interacted with him a bit. So he's been introduced to us now. So that is worth 1 point. So the introduction of Ray cancels out the excess exposition, and that leaves us with a total mostly objective score of 7 out of 10 for this episode. All right, so finally, With this score and the objective score 7 out of 10, we are out of episode order on our ranking list. So for our mostly objective ranking, we have Rebirth sitting at the top, followed by Confrontation. Then Pursuit goes into the number 3 spot, and Dealings is now at number 4. On the personal side, it also has now gone out of episode order. So my personal rating for this episode is based on the fact that I found the tests and their results very interesting. I like that it was light heavy with a sprinkling of L, but there wasn't a lot with the other cops that are kind of, like I said before, kind of boring. So I found myself amused throughout most of it. And then the hijack scene. It's clever. It's finally showing Light living up to the premise. It's very sad though. Honestly, the negative comes from the fact that it's just, you can see the tragedy incoming. It is so tragic. He held no suspicion. He would no longer be following the next day. But now Light has his name, and we know what that means. And it's tragic. It's going to be tragic. And it didn't need to be. And it's so needless that it is definitely worth the -2 points from the otherwise very entertaining episode, and an episode that I very much enjoyed. So I gave it a ranking of 8 out of 10. So now the personal ranking list, Rebirth still is at the top, but Pursuit's gone into second place, followed by Confrontation, and then finally at the bottom is Dealings in slot number 4. And so we come now to our series rankings so far. In the series ranking, again, we rank each part against each other. We won't know the final scores until we finish the series. But adding today's scores to the total, we have our mostly objective ranking now at 31 out of 260, and our personal ranking at 29 out of 260. Because, of course, there is 26 episodes within the first part, that does lead to a maximum possible score of 260. Once we finish the series, we'll know the percentage score for each part, and whichever part has the higher percentage will be considered the better part. And with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Death Note Part 1, Episode 4, Pursuit. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.